She came
As
to
you can see, the
finalize the
terms are quite
divorce.
favorable.
I see.
He
And the
froze
timeline?
when he
Within the
realized
quarter.
she was 7
Understood.
months pregnant the
How
day
are you
she
feeling?
walked into the
A
law
little
office.
nervous,
The
but
air
I'm
felt
okay.
heavy like a
I'm right
storm
here
about
with
to
you.
break. Papers were
This
already
is
waiting on the
unbelievable.
table.
What is
So was
it?
the end of a
The
marriage.
paternity test.
He
It's not
expected
what we thought.
anger.
What do you mean?
He expected silence. What he did not expect was the quiet truth hidden beneath her coat. When she sat down and he finally looked at her, his breath caught. Her face was calmer than he remembered, but her body told a different story. She was 7 months pregnant, and in that moment, everything he thought he knew about their ending fell apart. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. You're watching Kindness Diaries, a place where small acts of compassion change lives in the biggest ways. The story really began 2 years earlier, when Michael and Laura were still trying to convince themselves that love was enough. They had met in their late 20s, both busy, both ambitious, both believing that if you worked hard enough at a marriage, it would work back. But life doesn't always follow effort. Sometimes it follows kindness, and sometimes the lack of it. Michael worked long hours in real estate. Laura taught 3rd grade and came home every day with stories about kids who needed extra patience and care. At first, they laughed about how different their worlds were. Over time, those differences turned into distance. Dinners were missed. Conversations got shorter. Arguments got louder. When they finally talked about divorce, it felt almost like relief. No more pretending. No more waiting for the other person to change. They agreed to meet once, sign the papers, and move on. Laura almost didn't go that day. She stood in front of the mirror, one hand resting on her stomach, feeling the steady movement inside her. She had planned to tell Michael earlier. She had practiced the words 100 times. But every time she picked up the phone, fear stopped her. Fear of his reaction, fear of blame, fear that kindness would not be there when she needed it most. So she decided to tell him in person. The law office was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. Michael was already there, sitting stiffly, eyes fixed on the documents. He looked tired, older somehow. When Laura walked in, he barely looked up at first. They exchanged a few polite words. Awkward words, the kind people use when they're trying not to feel too much. Then Laura sat down. Michael noticed it slowly, like his mind was refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. The curve of her stomach, the way her hand rested there without thinking, the gentle rise and fall as she breathed. Laura, he said softly, his voice breaking. Are you? She nodded before he could finish. 7 months. The room went silent. Michael leaned back in his chair, his face pale. All the anger he had carried into that room vanished, replaced by shock and confusion. He looked at the papers on the table, then back at her, as if they suddenly belonged to someone else's life. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Laura swallowed hard. I wanted to. I just didn't know how. Things were already falling apart. I didn't want this to be another fight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lawyer quietly stepped out, sensing this meeting was no longer about paperwork. Michael finally stood up and walked to the window. His hands were shaking. He wasn't ready to be a father, or so he thought. He had been so focused on what he was losing in the divorce that he never imagined what he might still gain. I'm scared, he admitted, his back still turned. So am I, Laura said every day. That was the first honest conversation they had shared in months. They talked for over an hour, not about the divorce terms, but about fears, regrets, and moments they wished they could redo. Laura explained how lonely she had felt, how she needed support and warmth when she was exhausted and sick. Michael listened, really listened. For the first time in a long while, he apologized, not with excuses, not with promises, just a simple, heartfelt apology. I wasn't kind when you needed me most, he said. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't need perfection, she replied. I needed compassion. That word stayed with him. Compassion. They didn't magically fix everything that day. The divorce papers were still there. The hurt was still real, but something had shifted. Instead of seeing each other as enemies, they began to see each other as two imperfect people facing something much bigger than themselves. Michael asked if he could go with her to the next doctor's appointment. Laura hesitated, then nodded. From that moment on, he showed up. Not grand gestures, just presence. He learned about prenatal vitamins, nursery furniture, and late-night cravings. He sent messages asking how she felt. He listened without trying to solve everything. Kindness came back into the space where resentment used to live. As the baby's due date grew closer, they had another conversation. Not about getting back together, but about how they wanted to raise a child. With patience, with respect, with kindness, even when things were hard. You don't have to stay married to be decent to each other, Laura said. Michael smiled sadly. I know. But I want to be better than decent. When their daughter was born, Michael stood in the hospital room holding a tiny life that had changed him before she even took her first breath. Laura watched him carefully, unsure what the future would hold, but grateful for the present moment. They did not rush into reconciliation. Some stories don't need a fairy tale ending to be meaningful. They chose something quieter and braver, co-parenting with empathy, speaking gently, choosing kindness, even when it would be easier not to. Over time, trust began to rebuild, not because they were forced to, but because kindness made space for it.